After 15 months of war, Israel and Hamas have agreed to a second truce and hostage deal. What does this deal include? How long will it last? How many hostages will be released? Does this mean an end to the war? I'm Alon Burstein. Let's dive in. On Thursday, January 16th, Israel and Hamas agreed to a hostage deal and a truce in the ongoing war. The overarching deal is modeled after the proposed deal of May of 2024 and includes 3 phases, each of them supposed to last 42 days. These recent negotiations, however, focused almost entirely on the first phase of the agreement, which includes 5 broad categories. These are a truce and cessation of fighting in the Gaza Strip, the release of hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners, an IDF redeployment in the Gaza Strip, freedom of movement of internally displaced Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and the entrance of humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip. In the following video, I'm going to discuss each of these categories before turning to the broader question of whether or not this deal will lead to the second phase and an ultimate end to the war. The first phase of the deal will begin either on Sunday, January 19th or on Monday, January 20th. This depends right now on when the deal is approved in the Israeli government. During this phase, a 42-day truce will begin in the Gaza Strip, during which time no violent actions will take place from either side. As part of this truce, for 10 hours each day, Israel is forbidden from operating any aircraft in the airspace of the Gaza Strip. And on days that hostages will be released, this is extended to 12 hours, in which Israel is not allowed to operate any aircraft, either for military purposes or even for intelligence. In a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that Hamas insisted on this provision also in the previous hostage deal. This is likely associated with the organization moving hostages around to different locations, wanting to avoid Israel gathering intelligence about where the hostages either were held or where they are being moved to. With regards to the release of hostages, the first phase of the deal focuses on 33 hostages. This has been defined as a quote-unquote humanitarian deal, the humanitarian category, referring to hostages who are children under the age of 19, female civilians, female IDF soldiers, injured male hostages, and male hostages over the age of 50. At this point, it is unknown how many of those 33 hostages are alive, although a report in Fox News on January 15th stated that 23 out of the 33 hostages in this category are alive. Hamas has, over the past 15 months, stated that some of these hostages were killed in IDF attacks in the Gaza Strip, while life signs of other hostages have been given over the past months. According to the deal, the hostages will be released in the following order. The first to be released will be all female civilians and children who are held hostage. Then this will be followed by female IDF soldiers, then injured and older male hostages. Regarding the timetable, 3 hostages will be released on the first day of the truce, which, as I said, will either be Sunday, January 19th or Monday, January 20th. 4 hostages will be released on the 7th day of that agreement. After that, 3 hostages will be released every 7 days, i.e. 3 hostages per week. It is also agreed that all live hostages will be released before the return of bodies of hostages that have been killed within that humanitarian category. Regarding the release of Palestinian prisoners, the formula for the release of prisoners depends on the identity of who are the hostages who are released. For each female civilian or child who is held hostage and released, Israel is going to release 30 Palestinian women or children under the age of 19 who are held in Israeli prisons. Their identity will be according to Hamas's choosing. For each of the older male hostages, Israel will release 30 Palestinian prisoners. This will include 3 quote-unquote heavy prisoners serving life sentences and 27 more prisoners with more minimal sentences. For all 9 injured male hostages, Israel will release a total of 110, again, quote-unquote, heavy Palestinian prisoners, all of them serving life sentences in Israeli jails. Finally, for each female IDF soldier who is released, Israel will release 50 Palestinian prisoners. This will include 30 who are serving life sentences and 20 more who are serving more minimal sentences, again, for each female IDF soldier. Hamas can choose these prisoners that will be released as well, but it is also added that there are 100 prisoners in Israel who are serving life sentences that Israel can veto their release, and their release is going to be negotiated in the next phases. In a moment of analysis on this, I'm going to say that in the original deals of May and July, there was no release of the quote-unquote heavy Palestinian prisoners serving life sentences in exchange for either the older male hostages or injured male hostages. This appears to be something that was added during these negotiations. In the previous rounds, the prisoners who were supposed to be released were those who were not serving life sentences, again, for the injured male hostages and older male hostages. The release of the Palestinian prisoners is going to be done in parallel to the release of the Israeli hostages, i.e. on the day that the Israeli hostages are released throughout the deal, the Palestinian prisoners corresponding to those hostages are going to be released on that same day. In addition, it's also important to note that this entire formula that I just outlined is relevant only for live hostages who are released. According to the deal, Hamas will supply a complete list of the hostages to be released and their condition, i.e. who is alive and who is dead, by day 7 of the first phase. At this stage, however, it's unknown exactly how many Palestinian prisoners are going to be released, since it is unknown how many of those hostages of the 33 are in fact alive. With regards to the return of bodies of hostages within this quote-unquote humanitarian category, the deal is a bit more vague with regards to how many Palestinian prisoners will be released in exchange for the bodies of each hostage. It states on the one hand that Israel will release Palestinian women and children under the age of 19 who were arrested in the Gaza Strip since the war began in exchange for the return of these bodies. On the other hand, the appendix to the deal also states that regardless of this exchange, Israel is going to release 1,000 Palestinians who were arrested in the Gaza Strip since October 8th of 2023, so long as they did not participate in the October 7th attack. So at this point, it's unknown exactly what is going to be that exchange rate, so to speak. It is possible that this will be worked out in greater detail once Hamas supplies the list of live hostages, which again, as I stated, is supposed to happen on day 7. Turning to another major facet of the deal, during the truce, the IDF will carry out a substantial redeployment of its forces in the Gaza Strip. This includes broadly 4 facets. First, the military is going to pull its forces out of the densely populated areas, i.e. the main Palestinian cities, allowing Palestinians to return to these locations. At this point, this refers primarily to the areas in Gaza City and the areas in Rafah. Second, the IDF is going to pull a substantial amount of its forces out of the Philadelphia axis, that is the border between Gaza and Egypt. However, it is not going to completely abandon all positions. Instead, it is going to substantially reduce its presence in the area and also leave the Rafah crossing and set up around the crossing rather than manning the crossing itself. Third, by day 22 of the deal, i.e. within 3 weeks, the IDF is going to completely evacuate the Netzarim corridor, that is the buffer zone that the IDF has created dividing northern Gaza from the rest of the Gaza Strip. That area has been excavated and established by the IDF since it took over northern Gaza. Up until now, Palestinians throughout the entire war were not permitted to return north beyond the Netzarim corridor. That area is going to be evacuated. All the outposts and checkpoints in the area are going to be dismantled by day 22. Fourth, the IDF will maintain its presence along the buffer zone that the military has created between the Gaza Strip and Israel, i.e. along the border of the Gaza Strip. However, that buffer zone is going to be limited to 700 meters going into the Gaza Strip, except for 5 locations where Israel can choose that it is going to extend it to a full kilometer of a buffer zone. Again, it's also important to note that all this is the IDF redeployment only during the first phase of the deal. Regarding the freedom of movement of internally displaced Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, this has been a major bone of contention between the sides in the previous rounds of negotiation. Israel has consistently demanded that Palestinians returning to the northern parts of the Gaza Strip go through IDF checkpoints in order to stop the return of militants and armed people to northern Gaza, while Hamas has demanded the complete freedom of movement of Palestinians. According to the deal, on day 7 of the deal, the IDF is going to withdraw its forces from the Al-Rashid coastal road, that is one of the 2 main roads in the Gaza Strip that allows travel north, allowing Palestinians to begin returning to northern Gaza. In addition, as I stated above, by day 22, the IDF is going to withdraw from the Netzarim corridor, thereby opening the main road in the Gaza Strip, the Salahuddin road, that allows travel to northern Gaza, and Palestinians will also be permitted to travel through that road. With regards to the extent of freedom of movement, a compromise appears to have been reached. Starting on day 7, Palestinians who are unarmed pedestrians will have complete freedom of movement to northern Gaza, and they will not go through any inspection. So if they are pedestrians, provided they are unarmed, they can travel north without going through any checkpoint or any inspection. This starts on day 7 from Al-Rashid Road, and on day 22 through Salahuddin Road. In turn, vehicles and non-pedestrian traffic will go through inspection. According to the deal, this is going to be done by a private security company that is going to be set up by the negotiators and approved by Israel. In a moment of analysis, I'm going to say that while this appears to be a compromise between the sides, on the one hand, there's freedom of movement of pedestrians, but a monitoring mechanism for non-pedestrian traffic, the details of this compromise are very vague within this agreement, and they are likely to be a major point of contention between the sides. Among others, just a few examples, it states that Palestinian pedestrians will not be inspected, but it also says that this is so long as they are not armed, they can have freedom of movement. It's unclear how them being unarmed, the lack of arms, is going to be verified if the people are exempt from inspection. In addition, there's also no defined area, as in from this point you are considered a pedestrian or you are traveling by vehicle. So it is unclear, can Palestinians come by vehicle to a certain area and from there they can cross and be pedestrians and not go through inspection, or are they considered traveling by vehicle? Again, this may seem like nitty-gritty, but this is likely to be something that both sides are going to raise grievances about, stating that the deal is being violated by the other side because pedestrians are crossing, but they are being inspected because they might have arms, or because people are traveling by vehicle, but they got out of the vehicle, so therefore they're not being inspected. Again, at this point, that's my analysis. I'm just saying it is likely to be one of the main points of contention that are raised by both sides. Finally, with regards to the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip, the first phase of the deal includes an exponential increase in the entrance of humanitarian aid into Gaza. According to the deal, upwards of 600 aid trucks are going to enter into the Gaza Strip each day. These are going to include at least 50 fuel trucks, and according to the deal, half of the entire total of aid trucks coming into the Gaza Strip are going to be destined for northern Gaza. In another moment of analysis, I'm going to add that right now, upwards of 90% of the population in the Gaza Strip is actually located in the southern parts of the Strip, in the Al-Mawasi humanitarian zone and in the areas of Han Yunis and Deir al-Balah. And the stipulation that at least half of the aid trucks are going to be allocated to northern Gaza is likely a strategic move by Hamas in order to try to entice Palestinians to return north despite the vast devastation in Gaza City. In addition to the entrance of aid trucks, other facets that address the humanitarian situation include the opening of the Rafah crossing, that is a crossing between Gaza and Egypt, to allow the evacuation of injured Palestinians for medical treatment outside of the Strip. Alongside this, it is also interesting to note that within the deal, Hamas will be allowed to evacuate 50 injured militants through the Rafah crossing each day. However, their identity has to be approved by both Israel and Egypt. In addition, upwards of 60,000 housing caravans are going to be brought into the Gaza Strip and upwards of 200,000 tents to shelter internally displaced people. The deal also elaborates on restoration projects, including reconstruction of electrical grids, water, sewage lines, and communication lines, and the beginning of rebuilding hospitals. Industrial equipment for these projects is also going to be allowed in already in the first phase of the deal, although precise figures have not been published. Those are the main facets of phase one of the deal. However, before I conclude, I'm going to turn to discuss the biggest and possibly most important aspect of the entire deal, which is the transition between phases. Phase 2 of the deal is a de facto end of the war. It states that over 42 more days, there will be a continued truce and a complete idea of withdrawal from the Gaza Strip, including the evacuation of the Philadelphia Access, the release of the remaining 65 hostages in exchange for an undetermined, at this point, amount of Palestinian prisoners, and the establishment of what the sides have termed, quote-unquote, sustainable calm, i.e. a permanent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, and this is meant to lead to phase 3, which relates to rebuilding and rehabilitation of Gaza. According to the deal, on day 16 of phase 1, Israel and Hamas will commence negotiations with regards to the implementation of phase 2. However, it is also important to note that this transition between periods has been the largest sticking point in the negotiations over the past months. In all previous rounds of negotiations, Hamas has consistently demanded that there will be an automatic extension of the truce from phase 1 into phase 2, and thus once phase 1 begins, the truce will automatically lead to phase 2, which is a complete ceasefire and an end to the war. In turn, Israel has always demanded that the phases of the deal not be intertwined and that fighting be allowed to be resumed after phase 1 until phase 2 is negotiated. In the current deal, the wording appears to be an attempt to appease both sides and be deliberately vague. What is stated in Article 1 of Appendix 1 of this current deal is that, and I quote, all procedures of the first stage will continue in stage 2, so long as the negotiations of the conditions of implementing stage 2 are ongoing, and the guarantors of this agreement will work to ensure that negotiations continue until an agreement is reached, end quote. Thus, on the one hand, Hamas's version is more closely adhered to, since even if phase 2 is not agreed upon, the truce remains in effect as long as it is being negotiated. On the other hand, there are seemingly no sanctions or conditions if those negotiations break down, and thus despite the required pressure of the guarantor countries, i.e. the United States, Qatar, and Egypt, it is also possible for Israel to state at the end of phase 1 that negotiations over phase 2 have broken down, and thus there can be a return to fighting. What this means, in effect, is that we are likely going to see negotiations begin on day 16 of the truce in phase 1. However, in the final weeks, we are very likely to see increased pressure regarding these negotiations, and the question of whether or not fighting can resume at the end of phase 1 remains, at this point, somewhat open. That is my summary of the truce and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas. If you find these updates informative, please do remember to hit that like button, send them on to anyone you think might be interested in updates on the war. Subscribe if you want to know when updates come out. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. I'm Alon Burstein. I'm a visiting assistant professor and Israel Institute fellow in the Department of Political Science at Tufts University. Thanks for watching.